The great chamber stretched out like a metal ocean under a dome of stars. 847 different species sat in their assigned sections, each group looking as different from the others as night from day. Some floated in tanks of green liquid. Others perched on crystal formations that hummed with soft music. A few existed as balls of pure energy that pulsed with their thoughts. Ambassador Sarah Chun sat with the human delegation in Section 847. They were the newest members of the Galactic Assembly, having joined only 200 years ago. That made them babies compared to species like the Ethereal Collective, who had been part of the Assembly for over 10,000 years. Sarah looked around the chamber and felt the familiar weight of frustration in her chest. The humans sat in simple chairs at simple desks. They wore basic uniforms and carried paper notebooks. Next to the floating crystals and energy beings and creatures made of living metal, humans looked almost primitive, but Sarah knew better. She had seen what humans could do when they put their minds to something. She had seen their ships, their weapons, their ability to solve problems that other species thought were impossible. The problem was that the rest of the galaxy did not want to hear about any of that. The Council of Elders floated at the center of the chamber on a platform made of pure light. The 5 elders were from the oldest species in the galaxy. They had guided the assembly through thousands of years of peace and prosperity. Their word was law, and their wisdom was never questioned. Today, like every day for the past 3 cycles, they were discussing the Void Swarm. Elder Zephyr spoke first. Its voice was like wind through trees, soft and ancient. The entity approaches our outer territories. Our scientists estimate it will reach inhabited systems within 6 cycles. We must continue our peaceful negotiations, said Elder Morath, whose body was made of flowing water. Violence has never solved anything in our 10,000 years of unity. Sarah felt her jaw clench. She had heard this same speech dozens of times. The humans had been warning about the Void Swarm for 3 full cycles. They had presented detailed analysis of its movement patterns, its method of consuming entire star systems, and its complete lack of response to any communication. Attempted. The Void Swarm was not a species. It was not even alive in any way the galaxy understood. It was something else, something dark and hungry that turned stars into nothing and planets into empty space. It could not be reasoned with because it did not think the way living things thought, but every time humans tried to explain this, the Council dismissed their concerns. Ambassador Chun, Elder Zephyr called out. Please present humanity's latest observations. Sarah stood up slowly. Around her, 846 other delegations turned to look. She could feel their judgment like a physical weight. To most of them, humans were the violent newcomers who always wanted to fight first and ask questions later. Honored elders, Sarah began, our deep space monitors have tracked the Void Swarm's progress. It consumed the Kepler Belt mining stations yesterday. That's 3 days ahead of our worst projections. And what do you propose we do about this? Elder Zephyr asked. Sarah took a deep breath. We need to evacuate the outer colonies immediately. We need to mobilize every defense fleet in the galaxy. And we need to start building weapons that can actually hurt this thing. A wave of shocked whispers ran through the chamber. Several delegations made sounds of disapproval. The crystal being's humming turned discordant. Elder Morath's water body rippled with what Sarah had learned was anger. Ambassador Chun, you speak of violence and weapons as if they are solutions. The Assembly has maintained peace for 10 millennia through diplomacy and understanding. This is not a diplomatic problem, Sarah said, her voice getting louder despite her efforts to stay calm. The Void Swarm has destroyed 17 star systems. It doesn't communicate, it doesn't negotiate. It doesn't even seem to notice when we try to talk to it. It just consumes everything in its path. Every problem can be solved through peaceful means, said Elder Thizes, whose body was made of living crystal. We simply have not found the right approach yet. Sarah felt something snap inside her chest. The right approach? We've tried everything. Radio signals, quantum entanglement messages, Telepathic contact, mathematical proofs, artistic expressions, even sacrificial offerings. Nothing works because there's nothing there to work with. Perhaps, said Elder Zephes in its whined voice, the problem is that humans think too much like predators. You see threat where there might be opportunity for growth. Growth? Sarah stared at the floating elder. It destroyed the Centauri colonies last week. 40 billion people turned into nothing. How is that growth? Every loss teaches us something, Elder Morath replied. Perhaps those systems needed to be cleansed to make room for something better. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Around the chamber, she could see other delegations nodding in agreement. They were talking about 40 billion deaths like they were discussing the weather. You want to know what I think? Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. I think you've all been safe for so long that you've forgotten what real danger looks like. I think you're so used to talking your way out of problems that you can't recognize when talking won't work. The chamber erupted in angry sounds. Crystalline. Beings chimed in discord. Energy creatures flashed red. The water people's tanks bubbled furiously. Elder Zephes raised one of its flowing appendages for silence. Ambassador Chun, you are out of order. The Assembly has spoken on this matter many times. We will continue to pursue peaceful contact with the entity. We will not abandon our principles out of fear. And what about defensive preparations? Sarah asked. At least let us protect our colonies while you try to make friends with this thing. Absolutely not, Elder Thyses said firmly. Any military preparations would send the wrong message. How can we approach this entity with peaceful intentions while building weapons to destroy it? Sarah looked around the chamber one more time. She saw 846 delegations who had lived in peace for so long they had forgotten how to survive. She saw beings who would rather die than admit that sometimes violence was necessary. She saw a government that would sacrifice entire worlds rather than acknowledge that they might be wrong. Very well, Sarah said quietly. The chamber fell silent. Her voice carried to every corner of the vast space. Humanity hereby withdraws from all assembly obligations, effective immediately. The silence that followed was deeper than space itself. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the energy being stopped pulsing. Elder Zephes was the first to recover. Ambassador Chun, surely you do not mean... I mean exactly what I said, Sarah interrupted. Humanity came to this assembly seeking cooperation. We offered our knowledge, our technology, our friendship. We offered our strength to protect those who could not protect themselves. Since none of these things are welcome here, we will face the coming darkness alone. She gathered her papers and closed her notebook. The other human delegates stood with her, their faces grim but determined. You cannot simply leave, Elder Morath protested. The assembly requires nothing from us, Sarah said. We are withdrawing our membership, our trade agreements, our defense treaties, and our cooperation. Humanity wishes the assembly well in its peaceful negotiations with the Void Swarm. She turned and walked toward the exit. The other humans followed. Behind them, the chamber erupted in confused voices and angry protests. At the door, Sarah stopped and turned back one last time. When the Void Swarm comes for you, she said, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade, do not call for help. Do not ask for rescue. Do not beg for salvation. You have made your choice. Live with it. The doors closed behind the human delegation with a sound like thunder. The galaxy's newest members had just become its first refugees. The first day after humanity left the assembly, nobody really noticed. The galaxy was vast and busy, with millions of trade ships moving between stars every hour. The loss of one species, even one with 1,247 colonies, seemed like a small thing. Captain Vex of the Altarian Commerce Guild was the first to realize something was wrong. He had been running the same trade route for 30 years, carrying rare metals from the asteroid fields of Proxima to the manufacturing worlds of the Vega system. His usual stop was New Houston, a human colony that specialized in processing raw materials into finished goods, but when his ship arrived at New Houston, the space around the planet was empty. No orbital stations, no defense platforms, no traffic control signals. The planet itself was dark, showing no lights on the night side and no energy signatures anywhere. Maybe they moved everything to the other side, his co-pilot suggested. But a full orbital scan showed nothing. The cities were empty. The factories were cold. Even the atmosphere processors had been shut down. The planet was not destroyed. It was not damaged. It was simply abandoned. As if millions of people had just picked up and left in the middle of the night, Captain Vex sent a message to the trade guild headquarters on Altair Prime. The response came back within hours. 17 other ships had reported similar findings at human colonies across 3 sectors. Every human world they visited was empty. The trade guild sent the report to the Assembly. The Assembly filed it under minor colonial adjustments and forgot about it, but the effects were already spreading through the galaxy like ripples in a pond. Zara Keth ran a small restaurant on Rigel Station, one of the busiest trade hubs in the galaxy. Half her customers were humans who worked on the cargo ships that moved goods between the core worlds and the outer colonies. They were good customers, always polite, always paid their bills, and they tipped well on the second day. After the assembly meeting, none of them showed up for their usual meals. Maybe they're just busy, Zara told herself. But the third day was the same, and the fourth. By the end of the week, she realized she had not seen a single human on the station. She asked the station administrator about it. He checked his records and frowned. That's strange. We show 47 human ships scheduled to dock this week, but none of them have arrived. Their transponder signals just ... stopped. The station administrator filed a report with the Assembly. The Assembly added it to the growing pile of similar reports from across the galaxy. The crystalline communes were among the first to feel the real impact. Their entire economy was built on selling luxury crystals to other species. The crystals were beautiful but fragile, and they required special handling during transport. Only human shipping companies had the skill and patience to move them safely across interstellar distances. When the human ships stopped coming, the communes tried to hire other species to transport their goods. The Altarians were too rough and broke half the shipments. The vegans were too slow, and their crystals arrived months late. The Regalians were too expensive and demanded payment in advance. Within a month, the commune's trade had dropped by 70%. Their perfect crystal cities began to dim as they could no longer afford to maintain them. The hive worlds of Sector 7 faced a different problem. Their insect-like populations grew so fast that they needed constant imports of food and raw materials. Human agricultural worlds had been their primary suppliers for decades, providing cheap grain and protein in massive quantities. When the human food ships stopped arriving, the hive worlds sent desperate messages to other agricultural systems. But the other species could not match human production levels. Human farming was efficient, fast, and incredibly productive. A single human agricultural world could feed 3 hive worlds for a year. The first food riots began on Hive World Prime after 2 weeks without human shipments. The Assembly sent peacekeepers to restore order, but they could not manufacture food out of thin air. The ethereal collective, those ancient beings who had led the Assembly for 10,000 years, finally began to pay attention when their own comfort was affected. The collective existed as pure energy, but they still needed physical forms to interact with the material world. Those forms were created in specialized facilities that required rare earth elements found only on human mining worlds. When the supply of rare earth elements stopped, the collective's physical forms began to fade. They could still exist as energy, but they could no longer touch things or speak to other species directly. For beings who had ruled the galaxy for millennia, this was humiliating. Elder Zephes tried to contact the human colony on Kepler 442b. Which had been the collective's primary supplier of rare earth elements. The communication went through, but there was no response. Deep space sensors showed the planet was still there, but it was completely dark and silent. Ambassador Chun had returned to Earth immediately after the Assembly meeting. She found the planet in chaos, but it was a controlled chaos. Every human world was following the same plan, a plan that had been prepared in secret for months. The plan was called Protocol 7, and it was the most ambitious undertaking in human history. In simple terms, it meant that humanity was leaving normal space entirely. Human scientists had been working on dimensional technology for 50 years, ever since they realized that the galaxy was not as safe as it appeared. The technology allowed them to move entire planets, stations, and fleets into parallel dimensions where they could exist, but not be detected by normal sensors. The process was not easy. It required massive amounts of energy and precise coordination across hundreds of star systems. But humans had always been good at organizing large projects under pressure. Sarah Chun stood in the command center beneath the mountains of Colorado, watching screens that showed the progress of the exodus. One by one, human colonies were disappearing from normal space. Not destroyed, not abandoned, but moved to dimensions that existed alongside reality but separate from it. New Tokyo is ready for translation, reported Admiral Rodriguez, the head of the human fleet. All civilians are in dimensional shelters. All military assets are standing by. Proceed with translation, Sarah ordered on the main screen. She watched as the lights of New Tokyo Colony grew brighter and brighter until they seemed to burn like a star. Then, in an instant, they were gone. The planet was still there, but it was empty of human life. The humans had moved to a place where the rest of the galaxy could not follow. Translation complete, Admiral Rodriguez reported. New Tokyo is now operating in Dimension 7. All systems are nominal. Sarah nodded and turned to the next screen. 300 more colonies were waiting for translation. It would take months to move all of humanity to dimensional space. But they had time. The Void Swarm was still weeks away from reaching the core worlds where most humans lived. What about the other species? Asked Dr. Martinez, the head of the Dimensional Research Team. Are we really going to leave them to face the swarm alone? Sarah looked at the tactical display that showed the swarm's progress. It was moving faster than even their worst projections had predicted. The assembly had maybe 4 months before it reached the core worlds. We offered to help them, Sarah said quietly. We offered our knowledge, our technology, our strength. They chose to reject all of it. They chose to face the swarm with nothing but good intentions and peaceful words. But millions of people will die. And millions of people died in the outer colonies while the assembly debated whether violence was ever acceptable. Sarah's voice was cold. We tried to save them. They refused to be saved. Now we save ourselves. The translation of humanity continued through the night. By morning, 50 more colonies had vanished from normal space. To the rest of the galaxy, it looked like humanity was simply disappearing one world at a time. The assembly received reports of the disappearances, but they were too busy arguing about the proper way to greet the Void Swarm to pay much attention. Elder Zephi suggested that the humans had probably found a peaceful solution and moved to a better dimension. The other elders agreed that this was probably for the best. They had no idea that humanity was preparing for a war unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The first sign that something was wrong came from the Zentari hegemony. They were a proud species, tall and golden-skinned, with a civilization that had lasted for 5,000 years. Their star system was at the edge of the galaxy, far from the core worlds where most of the assembly met. Admiral Corin Thass of the Zentari fleet was monitoring the deep space sensors when he saw it. At first, it looked like a dark cloud moving between the stars. But as he watched, he realized it was much larger than any cloud. It was the size of a small moon, and it was moving toward their system at impossible speed. Sir, his communications officer reported, we're getting strange readings from the object. It's not made of normal matter. Our sensors can't get a clear lock on it. Admiral Thass remembered the warnings from the human ambassador. The Void Swarm was supposed to be made of dark matter, something that barely interacted with normal space. But the assembly had said those warnings were just human paranoia. Send a diplomatic message, Admiral Thass ordered. Use the standard first contact protocols. Tell them we come in peace and wish to establish communication. The message was sent using every method the Zentari knew. Radio waves, quantum entanglement, even telepathic broadcasting. They transmitted mathematical proofs, artistic expressions, and offers of friendship. They sent their most beautiful music and their most profound poetry. The dark cloud did not respond. It did not slow down. It did not change course. It simply continued moving toward their system like a slow-moving storm. "Sir," the sensor officer called out, "the object is approaching. Is Centauri 3? It's covering the entire planet." On the main screen, Admiral Thas watched in horror as the dark cloud enveloped the third planet in their system. For a moment, the planet was completely hidden. Then the cloud moved on, and where Centauri 3 had been, there was nothing. Not even dust, not even empty space. Just a void that made the stars behind it flicker strangely. 8 billion people, whispered the communications officer. 8 billion people just ... gone. Admiral Thas felt his throat go dry. The human warnings had been true. This was not a species they could negotiate with. This was something that simply consumed everything it touched. "Send a message to the assembly," he ordered. "Tell them the void swarm is real. Tell them it's here. Tell them we need help immediately." But even as he gave the order, Admiral Thas knew it was too late. The dark cloud was already moving towards Centauri Prime, the homeworld of his species. He had maybe 6 hours before it arrived. The Centauri fleet moved to intercept the swarm. They had 100 ships, each one armed with the most advanced weapons their civilization could build. Energy cannons, quantum torpedoes, antimatter bombs. They had defeated pirates and rebels with these weapons. They had conquered entire star systems, but when they fired on the void swarm, nothing happened. The energy beams passed through it like light through fog. The torpedoes exploded harmlessly in empty space. The antimatter bombs created brief flashes of light and then vanished without effect. The swarm did not even notice their attacks. It continued moving towards Centauri Prime as if the entire fleet was not there. Admiral Thas watched his homeworld disappear the same way as Centauri 3. One moment it was there, with its golden cities and crystal towers. The next moment it was gone, leaving only a hole in space that hurt to look at. His last message to the assembly was simple. The humans were right. We are all going to die. The news of the Centauri system's destruction sent shockwaves through the galaxy. For the first time in 10,000 years, an entire species had been wiped out in a single day. The assembly called an emergency session, but they were paralyzed by fear and confusion. Elder Zephys floated in the center of the chamber, its wind voice shaking with uncertainty. "The entity has proven more aggressive than we anticipated. But we must not abandon our principles. Violence is never the answer." "What principles?" screamed the delegate from the Rigelian Alliance. "The Centauri sent diplomatic messages right up until the moment they died. The swarm doesn't care about our principles." "We must try harder," Elder Morath insisted, its water body rippling with agitation. Perhaps the Centauri did not use the proper greeting protocols. Perhaps they offended the entity somehow. But even as the elders spoke, more reports were coming in. The swarm had moved on from the Centauri system and was heading toward the crystalline communes. It was moving faster now, as if consuming the Centauri had made it stronger. The communes had 3 days to prepare. They tried everything they could think of. They sent messages in every language they knew. They created beautiful light displays that could be seen from space. They even tried to communicate through their crystals, which could resonate across dimensions. Nothing worked. The swarm arrived exactly when predicted and consumed the commune's perfect crystal cities in less than an hour. 5 trillion beings, each one a living gem that had taken centuries to grow, were erased from existence. The galaxy began to panic. Species that had lived in peace for millennia suddenly remembered what fear felt like. Ancient defense fleets that had been ceremonial for centuries tried to prepare for battle. But their weapons were designed for parades, not war. Their ships were built for exploration, not fighting. The hive worlds of Sector 7 tried a different approach. They had millions of ships, small and fast, like metal insects. They swarmed the void swarm from every direction, hoping to overwhelm it with numbers. It was like watching mosquitoes attack a hurricane. The swarm consumed their ships so quickly that they barely had time to send distress signals. Entire fleets vanished in seconds. The hive worlds sent more ships and then more until they had thrown away everything they had in the end. The swarm consumed the hive worlds just as easily as it had consumed the Zentari and the communes. Trillions of insect-like beings, each one part of a vast collective mind, was silenced forever. The assembly tried to organize a coordinated defense, but they had no idea how to fight something like the swarm. Their military technology was thousands of years out of date. Their strategies were designed for conflicts between civilized species, not for battling a force of nature. Fleet Admiral Corvin of the Assembly Defense Force was in charge of the galaxy's military response. He was a decent officer, but he had never fought a real war. None of them had. The galaxy had been at peace for so long that they had forgotten how to kill. "We need to concentrate all our forces at the Vega system," Admiral Corvin announced at the emergency military briefing. "If we can stop the swarm there, we can protect the core worlds." But when the swarm reached Vega, it was like watching a tsunami hit a sandcastle. The Assembly's grand fleet, with 1,000 ships from 50 different species, was destroyed in minutes. The swarm did not even slow down as it consumed their vessels and moved on to the next system, Elderthizes, whose crystal body had begun to crack from stress, finally spoke the words that everyone was thinking. "Perhaps we should try to contact the humans. Perhaps they know something we do not." "The humans abandoned us," Elder Zephes replied, but its wind voice was weak and uncertain. "They chose to leave rather than help us find a peaceful solution." "Maybe they knew there was no peaceful solution," said the delegate from the Aquarius Reef cities. "Maybe they saw this coming and tried to warn us." "Impossible," Elder Morith sighed, but its water body was churning with doubt. "Violence is never the answer. The humans were simply too primitive to understand true diplomacy." But privately, the elders were beginning to wonder if they had made a terrible mistake. The swarm was now only 3 systems away from the core worlds. At its current speed, it would reach the Assembly's capital in 2 weeks, deep in the archives of the Assembly. A minor clerk named Bex found something interesting. While searching through old records, she discovered a series of reports that had been filed under human paranoia and forgotten. The reports detailed everything the humans had learned about the Void Swarm over 3 years of study. According to the human data, the swarm was not really alive. It was more like a force of nature, a kind of cosmic storm that consumed matter and energy to grow stronger. It could not be reasoned with because it did not think. It could not be negotiated with because it had no goals beyond consumption. But the most disturbing part of the reports was the human analysis of the swarm's origin. According to their scientists, the swarm had been created by an ancient civilization that had tried to build the perfect weapon. They had succeeded too well. The weapon had consumed its creators and then wandered the galaxy for millions of years, growing stronger with each world it devoured. The humans had calculated that the swarm would need to consume at least half the galaxy before it had enough energy to reproduce. If it succeeded, it would split into multiple swarms that would spread to other galaxies, consuming everything in their path. Bex took the reports to the elders, but they were too busy arguing about evacuation procedures to pay attention. The galaxy was ending, and they were still debating the proper way to surrender. In the depths of space, far from the panic and chaos of the Assembly, something else was happening. Ships appeared and disappeared like ghosts, visible for only seconds, before vanishing again. They were not like any ships the galaxy had ever seen. They moved through dimensions that the Aquarius Reef cities were the last to fall before the swarm reached the core worlds. They had been beautiful once, floating cities of coral and crystal that drifted through the oceans of a dozen water worlds. The inhabitants were graceful, beings who moved through water like dancers, creating art from living coral that grew for thousands of years. Captain Reef singer Kala watched from her escape pod as the swarm consumed her homeworld. The dark cloud settled over the ocean like a blanket, and where it touched the water, everything simply stopped existing. The great reefs that had taken millennia to grow vanished in seconds. The cities full of art and music and poetry disappeared. As if they had never been, her pod was one of only a few dozen that escaped. Out of 8 billion Aquarians, maybe 1,000 survived. They fled toward the core worlds, carrying the news that the swarm was only days away from the Assembly's capital. Elder Zephyrs received the refugees in the great chamber where humanity had once sat. The chamber was half empty now. Many species had fled to the far edges of the galaxy, hoping distance would save them. Others had simply given up and returned to their homeworlds to wait for the end. Honored survivors, Elder Zephyrs said in its wind voice, we share your grief, but we must not lose hope. We are still seeking a diplomatic solution. Captain Kala floated in an emergency water tank, her gill slits fluttering with exhaustion and rage. There is no diplomatic solution, she said. I watched it consume our worlds. It doesn't communicate. It doesn't think. It just eats everything and moves on. The humans told us this, said a small voice from the back of the chamber. It was Bex, the clerk who had found the old reports. They studied the swarm for 3 years. They knew exactly what it was and how to fight it. We called them warmongers and threw them out. Elder Morith's water body churned angrily. The humans were violent primitives who thought strength could solve every problem. We are not like them. No, Captain Kala agreed. We are not like them. They are alive and we are about to be dead. The chamber fell silent. Outside the great dome, they could see ships fleeing the capital system. The swarm would arrive in less than a week, and everyone knew the Assembly's remaining defenses would last maybe an hour against it. Perhaps, Elder Thizes said quietly, its crystal body dim. With stress, we should try to contact the humans. Perhaps they would help us evacuate the remaining populations. They abandoned the galaxy, Elder Zephyrs replied. Their colonies are empty. Their ships are gone. They have hidden themselves away and left us to face this alone. Then let us find where they went, suggested the delegate from the Tau Ceti Federation. We have the best scientists in the galaxy. Surely we can track them down. The Assembly agreed to try. They sent their fastest scout ships to every known human colony, hoping to find some trace of where humanity had gone. The ships searched for weeks, scanning empty worlds and abandoned space stations. Looking for any clue, they found nothing. The human worlds were not destroyed or damaged. They were simply empty, as if millions of people had just vanished into thin air. There were no energy signatures, no dimensional tiers, no signs of advanced technology. Humanity had disappeared without leaving a trace. But on the 7th day, while the Assembly scientists were analyzing their failure to find any trace of humanity, something unexpected happened. A message appeared on every communication system in the galaxy simultaneously. It bypassed security protocols, ignored encryption, and appeared in every language known to exist. The message was simple. This is Ambassador Sarah Chun. By now you understand that the Void Swarm cannot be negotiated with. It cannot be reasoned with. It cannot be stopped by peaceful means. You have 3 hours to evacuate your remaining populations to the following coordinates. A list of star systems appeared on the screens. They were all empty systems with no planets or stations. Just empty space far from any inhabited worlds. Elder Zephyrs tried to respond to the message, but there was no return signal. The transmission had come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It's a trick, Elder Morith declared. The humans want us to abandon our worlds so they can claim them for themselves. Our worlds are about to be consumed by the swarm anyway, Captain. Kala pointed out. What difference does it make? But the Assembly could not agree on what to do. Some wanted to evacuate to the coordinates humanity had provided. Others refused to trust the humans who had abandoned them. The debate went on for 2 hours while precious time slipped away. Finally, individual species began making their own decisions. The surviving Aquarians loaded their people into evacuation ships and headed for the coordinates. So did the remnants of the Tau Ceti Federation and the few remaining crystalline communes. But the Ethereal Collective and many others refused to leave, determined to make one final attempt at peaceful contact with the swarm. The evacuation was chaos. Millions of ships fled the core worlds, carrying the last survivors of hundreds of species. Most had never seen anything like it. The galaxy had been at peace for so long that they had no experience with large-scale emergencies. Ships collided in crowded space lanes. Refugees ran out of food and water. Panic spread faster than news. The great civilization that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years fell apart in a single day. Sarah Shun watched the evacuation from the command center in Dimension 7. Around her, holographic displays showed the movement of refugee ships and the steady approach of the void swarm. Her face was older now, marked by months of preparation and the weight of decisions no human had ever had to make. 80% of the refugees have reached the safe zones, Admiral Rodriguez reported. The remaining 20% refuse to leave or are too far away to reach safety in time. And the swarm? Sarah asked. 6 hours from the assembly capital. It's moving faster now, probably because it's consumed so much matter. Our dimensional sensors show it's almost ready to reproduce. Sarah nodded grimly. If the swarm reproduced, it would split into multiple entities that would spread across the galaxy and eventually to other galaxies. Earth scientists estimated that a reproducing swarm could consume the entire universe within 1,000 years. Are our forces ready? She asked. As ready as they can be, Admiral Rodriguez replied. We've had 6 months to prepare, but we're still not sure if our weapons will work. We're fighting something that exists partially outside normal space-time. The weapons will work, Dr. Martinez said from his station. We've tested them in 17 different dimensions. The swarm may be made of dark matter, but it still follows the laws of physics. It can be destroyed. Sarah turned to face the main display, which showed the void swarm approaching the assembly capital like a black storm cloud. Around the capital, she could see the last desperate attempts at defense. Ships from dozens of species were firing everything they had at the swarm, but their weapons passed harmlessly through it. Send the message, Sarah ordered. A new transmission appeared on every screen in the galaxy. This time it included video. Sarah Chun stood in what was clearly a military command center, wearing a black uniform with insignia that no one in the galaxy recognized. Behind her, displays showed weapons and ships that looked nothing like the technology the galaxy knew. People of the Assembly, Sarah began, you called us warmongers. You said our methods were too extreme and our thinking too militaristic. You were right. While you debated proper diplomatic protocol, we prepared for war. While you sought peaceful solutions, we built weapons you cannot imagine. While you maintained your principles, we abandoned ours and became something you would not recognize. The transmission showed brief images of human ships that seemed to phase in and out of reality, weapons that fired energy from parallel dimensions, and soldiers in armor that bent light around them. The void swarm is not your enemy, Sarah continued. It is your teacher. It shows you what the universe truly is. Not a garden to be tended with kind words and good intentions, but a battlefield where only the strong survive. We learned this lesson long ago on a small world where we almost destroyed ourselves learning to fight. You rejected our help when it was freely offered. You dismissed our warnings when they could have saved billions of lives. But we will not watch the galaxy die because of your failures. We will save you despite yourselves. The transmission ended, and for a moment, the galaxy was silent. Then space itself seemed to tear open around the void swarm. Ships appeared from nowhere, emerging from dimensions that normal sensors could not detect. They were sleek and dark, moving with impossible grace through space that seemed to bend around them. The war for the galaxy's survival had begun. The first human ship to engage the void swarm was the UES Perseverance, a vessel that existed in 7 dimensions at once. Captain Maria Santos watched her targeting systems lock onto the dark mass that had consumed half the galaxy. Her crew had trained for this moment for 6 months, but they were still facing something no human had ever fought before. All weapons charged, her tactical officer reported. Dimensional torpedoes armed and ready. Fire, Captain Santos ordered. The torpedoes that launched from the Perseverance were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They traveled through folded space, hitting the swarm from angles that should not have existed. When they struck, reality seemed to crack around the impact points, creating wounds in the dark matter that glowed with impossible colors. For the first time since it had appeared, the void swarm reacted to an attack. It twisted and writhed like a living thing, parts of its dark mass breaking away and dissolving into nothing. But it was far from destroyed. If anything, the attack seemed to make it angry. The swarm lashed out with tendrils of dark energy that reached across space toward the human ships. But the ships simply vanished, slipping sideways into dimensions where the attack could not follow. They reappeared seconds later in new positions, firing again before disappearing once more. Captain Kala watched the battle from her refugee ship, her gill slits fluttering with amazement. The humans were fighting the swarm the way her people had once danced through coral reefs, flowing around obstacles that could not be overcome directly. "How are they doing that?" asked another Aquarian survivor. "They're not fighting in normal space," Kala realized. "They're using dimensions we can't even see. The swarm exists in dark matter, but the humans have learned to exist in something else entirely." The battle raged for hours. More human ships appeared from dimensional tiers, each one different from the last. Some were sleek and fast, darting around the swarm like silverfish. Others were massive and heavily armored, standing their ground and trading blows with the dark entity. A few were so strange that they hurt to look at, their geometry existing in ways that normal space could not contain. But the swarm was learning. Each time the humans attacked, it adapted its defenses. Each time they vanished into other dimensions, it found new ways to track them. The battle that had started as a human advantage began to turn into a stalemate. In the command center in Dimension 7, Sarah Chun watched the tactical displays with growing concern. The swarm was larger and more adaptable than their worst projections. Every time they found a way to hurt it, it found a way to heal. Every time they discovered a weakness, it evolved past it. "We're not winning," Admiral Rodriguez reported. "We're doing damage, but it's regenerating faster than we can destroy it, and our ships are taking losses." "How long can we maintain this?" Sarah asked. "Maybe 6 hours at full intensity. After that, we'll have to pull back and regroup." "But if we give the swarm time to adapt to our weapons?" Sarah nodded grimly. "The swarm would become immune to their attacks and then continue consuming the galaxy. Everything they had sacrificed would be for nothing. What about the core strike?" she asked. Dr. Martinez looked up from his dimensional analysis station. "The calculations are complete, but the risks are enormous. We're talking about collapsing the barriers between 12 dimensions simultaneously. If we get it wrong, we could destroy more than just the swarm." "How much more?" "Potentially everything. The entire galaxy, maybe more. We would be creating a wound in reality itself." Sarah stared at the tactical display, watching human ships flicker in and out of existence as they fought a battle that was slowly being lost. The refugee ships waited in the safe zones, carrying the last survivors of hundreds of species. If humanity failed here, there would be no second chances. "Do it," she decided. "Sarah," Admiral Rodriguez said quietly, "if this goes wrong, we'll have destroyed the very galaxy we're trying to save. And if we don't do it, the swarm will destroy it anyway, and then spread to other galaxies. At least this way we have a chance." The order went out across the human fleet. Ships began taking new positions around the swarm, not to attack it directly, but to create a perfect geometric pattern in 12 dimensions. It was the most complex military maneuver in history, requiring precision that was beyond the ability of any single mind to calculate, but humans had always been good at working together. Across 1,000 ships, tens of thousands of crew members performed their individual tasks with perfect coordination. They had trained for this moment, planned for it, sacrificed everything for it. The swarm seemed to sense that something was different. It stopped its attacks and began to contract, pulling its scattered parts together into a tighter formation. For the first time since the battle began, it seemed defensive rather than aggressive. All ships report ready, Admiral Rodriguez announced. Dimensional charges are in position. We'll go for core strike. Sarah took a deep breath. In a few moments, they would either save the galaxy or destroy it. There was no middle ground, no safe option, no way to test their plan. They would either succeed completely or fail catastrophically. Execute core strike, she ordered. Reality screamed. The dimensional charges detonated simultaneously, tearing holes in the fabric of space-time itself. The barriers between dimensions collapsed, creating a vortex that existed in 12 different realities at once. The swarm was caught in the center of it, unable to escape into normal space or dark matter dimensions. For a moment, the swarm fought against the collapsing dimensions. Its dark mass writhed and twisted, trying to find a way out of the trap. But the vortex was too strong, too perfectly calculated. The swarm was pulled deeper and deeper into the dimensional collapse. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of being destroyed, the swarm began to change. The dark matter that had consumed so many worlds started to transform, becoming something new. The vortex was not destroying the swarm, but converting it into a different kind of entity entirely. What's happening? Sarah demanded. Dr. Martinez was frantically analyzing the dimensional readings. The swarm is being reconstructed at a quantum level. The dimensional collapse is rewriting its basic programming. It's becoming something else. Something else like what? I don't know. Something that has never existed before. The transformation took less than a minute. When it was over, the void swarm was gone. In its place was something that looked like a galaxy-sized flower made of pure light. It pulsed with gentle energy, and where its light touched the empty spaces, where worlds had been consumed, new matter began to form. The entity that had once been the void swarm was now creating instead of destroying. Stars began to shine in the darkness where the Centauri system had been. Planets formed in the space where the crystalline communes had lived. The Aquarius water worlds began to take shape again, but they were different now, more beautiful than they had been before. It's rebuilding everything, Dr. Martinez whispered. Every world, every life, every civilization that was consumed. It's all coming back. On the refugee ships, survivors watched in amazement as their homeworlds appeared again. But these were not copies or memories. These were the actual places and people that had been destroyed, somehow pulled back from the moment of consumption and restored to life. Captain Calla felt tears in her eyes as she watched the Aquarius reef cities form. Again in the depths of space, the great coral reefs were growing at impossible speed, more beautiful than ever. Her people, her family, her entire civilization was being reborn. The transformation spread across the galaxy. Every world that had been consumed was restored. Every life that had been lost was returned. The swarm had become something like a cosmic gardener, healing the wounds it had once created, but the greatest surprise came when the restored worlds began to communicate. The entities that had been recreated were not quite the same as they had been before. They had memories of being consumed, of existing briefly as part of the swarm, and of being transformed into something new. "We understand now," said the voice of the reformed Centauri Admiral Fass. "We see what the humans saw. The universe is not safe. It is not peaceful. It is full of wonders and horrors in equal measure. We must be ready for both." The reformed galaxy was different from the old one. The species that had been restored were still themselves, but they had gained something from their experience. They had learned what it meant to face extinction and survive. They had learned the value of strength and the necessity of being prepared for war, but humanity did not return to normal space. Sarah Chun's final message was broadcast to every world in the galaxy. "We have done what we came to do. The galaxy is safe, but it will not always be safe. There are other threats out there, other swarms, other dangers that will test you again. You must be ready. We will watch from the spaces between dimensions. We will guard the borders of reality itself, but we will not govern you. We will not make your decisions for you. You must learn to stand on your own as we had to learn. The universe is vast and full of wonders, but it is also full of horrors. Be ready for both. Be strong. Be united. And remember that sometimes the greatest mercy is the willingness to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. The transmission ended and humanity faded back into the dimensions.